My name is Kaitlyn, and months after a question at dinner detonated my old life, I discovered how ordinary triumph can feel. A key that works every time, a balance that does not tremble, mornings that begin with coffee instead of dread. Rebuilding was not cinematic. It was paperwork and boundaries, small choices repeated until they formed a life. Then joy returned. Colleagues trusting my eye, dinners with Walter that felt like family instead of strategy, and love that asked for honesty, not performance. We convinced ourselves we deserved it, my mother added quietly. For raising you, for all the sacrifices we made as parents. We told ourselves we would pay it back before you ever needed to know. And the apartment? I asked. The one Grandpa bought for me 2 years ago. What was your plan there? They exchanged guilty glances. My father sighed heavily. We were renting it out. The income was going into our account. The betrayal felt fresh all over again. While I had been sharing a cramped apartment with a roommate, they had been collecting rent on a luxury property that was supposed to be mine. Walter placed a steadying hand on my shoulder before addressing my parents. Here are your options. Option 1. You sign over all remaining assets purchased with trust fund money, cooperate fully with recovery efforts, and agree to a structured repayment plan for what cannot be recovered immediately. In exchange, Kaitlyn agrees not to press criminal charges. My parents nodded eagerly. Option 2, Walter continued, his voice hardening. You continue to obfuscate and defend your actions, in which case we proceed with criminal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and theft. The evidence is overwhelming. You would both face significant prison time. We choose option 1, my father said quickly. We'll cooperate completely. Walter looked to me. Kaitlyn, the decision is yours. I studied my parents, these people who had raised me, who had tucked me in at night and cheered at my graduations. The same people who had systematically stolen my inheritance while watching me struggle. The conflicting emotions were overwhelming. I don't want them in prison, I finally said. But I want every penny recovered that can be recovered. And I want them to acknowledge exactly what they did, not just to me, but to the entire family. The legal details were worked out over the next several hours. My parents signed document after document transferring assets and agreeing to the terms Walter's team had outlined. By the end of the day, I legally owned their house in Florida, which would be sold, and arrangements were made to recover as many of their possessions as possible for liquidation. The cooperation was formalized in a stipulated order the judge signed the next morning, converting the emergency holds into a court-ordered freeze while recovery proceeded. When the attorneys stepped out to make copies, I found myself alone with my parents for the first time since my birthday. Why? I asked simply. I want to understand how you could do this. My mother reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. We got caught up in a lifestyle we couldn't really afford. Your father made some bad investments early in our marriage, and we were always trying to catch up to keep up appearances. When we had access to your trust, it seemed like an easy solution, just a little to help us get ahead. But it never stopped. We have a problem with money, my father admitted, looking truly ashamed for the first time. With spending with status. We need help. Professional help. That doesn't excuse what we did to you, but maybe it helps explain it. For them, status had come to feel safer than honesty. A poor compass they confused for love. It wasn't enough. No explanation could ever be enough. But it was a start. A tiny crack in the wall of betrayal that stood between us. 2 weeks later, I moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment purchased with part of the recovered funds. It wasn't the luxury Gold Coast property that should have been mine, but it was mine free and clear with no mortgage or rent to worry about. Walter helped me select it, insisting on security features and a good location near public transportation. With Walter's guidance, I began to learn about financial management. The recovered assets, including the Florida house and various liquidated possessions, amounted to approximately $1.2 million, a fraction of what the trust should have been worth, but still life-changing for someone who had been living paycheck to paycheck. A new job opportunity came through a connection of Walter's. A position at a respected design firm with better pay and advancement potential than my previous job. While I was initially hesitant to accept help that felt like nepotism, Walter pointed out that getting me the interview was all he had done. Earning the position was entirely my achievement. As spring turned to summer, I began to establish new routines and healthy boundaries. I allowed limited contact with my parents, accepting brief phone calls but declining their requests to visit. They had moved into a small rental apartment and were both in therapy for financial addiction, a term I had never heard before but which accurately described their behavior. Walter and I grew closer, our weekly dinners becoming a fixture in my calendar. He taught me about investments and business with the same precision and attention to detail that had made him successful. I began to see past his gruff exterior to the complex, caring man beneath. Jennifer, surprisingly, became a friend as well. Having worked for Walter for over 15 years, she had stories about him that humanized him in ways I had never expected. She also proved to be an excellent mentor for professional development, helping me navigate office politics and career planning with her characteristic efficiency. Most unexpected was the re-emergence of Thomas, a friend from college I had lost touch with. He reached out after seeing me at a coffee shop near my new apartment, and our reconnection felt like finding an anchor in stormy seas. He had no connection to my family drama, no preconceived notions about who I should be. With him, I could just be Kaitlyn, not the victim of a high-profile family betrayal. As summer faded into fall, I began to feel something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not just for financial stability, but for rebuilding a life that was authentically mine, founded on truth rather than deception. 6 months after the revelation that changed everything, I found myself thriving in ways I never would have predicted. My position at the design firm evolved from a basic graphic designer role to leading a small team working on a major rebranding project for a national client. The creative director had taken notice of my work and increasingly sought my input on high-profile assignments. Walter helped me establish a proper financial foundation with the recovered funds. The approximately $1.2 million was carefully invested, with a portion set aside for immediate security. I now had a retirement account, health insurance that actually covered more than catastrophic emergencies, and an emergency fund that would sustain me for a full year if necessary. For someone who had spent years counting pennies and worrying about unexpected expenses, the security was almost disorienting. I still found myself hesitating before making simple purchases, the habits of financial anxiety deeply ingrained despite my changed circumstances. My parents continued to struggle with the consequences of their actions. They had been forced to downsize dramatically, moving from their 5-bedroom house to a small 2-bedroom apartment in a modest neighborhood. My father took a position at a small insurance agency several steps down from his previous executive role. My mother surrendered her real estate license as part of the legal settlement and worked as an administrative assistant. The social fallout was perhaps the most difficult adjustment for them. Former friends distanced themselves once the story spread through their circle. They were no longer invited to the country club events and charity galas that had once been the center of their social calendar. After months of limited contact, I agreed to meet them for coffee at a neutral location. They arrived early, visibly nervous, bearing no gifts or overtures beyond their evident desire to reconnect. "We've been working with our therapist on making amends," my mother explained, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "Not just to you, but to Walter, and to ourselves. We understand that we can't undo what we did. We're establishing boundaries with money," my father added. "Separate accounts, strict budgets, accountability partners. It's like being in recovery from any other addiction." I listened more than I spoke, observing the changes in them. There was a humility that had never been present before, an absence of the designer labels and status symbols that had once seemed essential to their identity. Before we parted, my mother asked hesitantly if we could establish regular contact, perhaps a monthly lunch. I agreed to consider it, unwilling to commit but no longer completely closed to the possibility of a carefully constructed relationship. Walter had suffered a minor health scare in early fall, a warning from his doctor about his blood pressure that resulted in lifestyle modifications and a reduced work schedule. The brush with mortality softened him further, making him more reflective about family relationships despite the pain of betrayal. "Your grandmother always said that family was worth fighting for," he told me during one of our weekly dinners. "Not worth sacrificing your self-respect or safety, but worth the effort of understanding and forgiveness when possible." I was learning from Walter not just about financial management, but about resilience in the face of betrayal. He had been deeply hurt by my parents' actions, yet he maintained a steady presence in my life, never allowing his disappointment in them to affect his relationship with me. With Walter's encouragement, I started a small side business in graphic design consulting, working with startup companies that couldn't afford full-service agencies. The work was challenging and rewarding, allowing me to build something entirely my own independent of family connections or recovered funds. My confidence grew not just professionally, but personally. The therapy sessions that had begun as crisis management evolved into a valuable tool for examining patterns and building healthier relationships. I was learning to trust my own judgment again, to recognize that I had been a victim, not because of any failure on my part, but because those I trusted had made terrible choices. An unexpected development came in the form of a surprise dinner arranged by Walter 6 months to the day after my fateful birthday. He reserved a private dining room at a restaurant even more exclusive than the one where our family had imploded. But this time, the atmosphere was entirely different. When I arrived, I found not just Walter but also Jennifer, Stanley, my cousin Natalie, and even Thomas, all gathered to celebrate what Walter called my half-birthday. 6 months ago, your life changed in ways no one could have predicted, Walter said, raising a glass in toast. Tonight we celebrate not what was lost, but what you have built from the ashes. After dinner, Walter presented me with a small box. Inside was a key and a deed to a new apartment, modest, but in a secure building with a short commute to my office. The Gold Coast property was sold as part of the recovery efforts, he explained. This one is entirely yours, purchased with recovered funds, but selected specifically for your current life, not the one that was taken from you. The gesture moved me to tears, not because of the material value, but because it represented a clean break with the past, a fresh start untainted by betrayal. My relationship with Natalie evolved from cautious connection to genuine friendship. Free from the artificial competition that had characterized our earlier interactions, we discovered shared interests and complementary personalities. She even invested in my side business, providing capital for expansion in exchange for a modest equity stake. A transaction Walter helped structure to ensure fairness for both of us. I always thought you had the perfect family, she confessed during a lunch date. It's strange how we envied each other for things that weren't even real. Thomas had become more than a friend in recent months, our coffee meetings evolving into dinner dates and long conversations that often continued late into the evening. He had been present through the worst of the aftermath without trying to fix or minimize my pain, simply offering steady support and the occasional necessary distraction. When he kissed me for the first time on a walk along the lakeshore near my new apartment, it felt like crossing a threshold into a part of my life untouched by the betrayal. Here was something entirely new, a relationship built on a foundation of honesty from the beginning. I began using a portion of my recovered funds to establish a small mentorship program for young designers from disadvantaged backgrounds, providing scholarships for software training and professional development. The program was still in its infancy, but helping others who faced financial barriers to creative careers brought a sense of purpose that transcended my personal experience. As fall turned to winter, I realized that while the betrayal would always be part of my story, it no longer defined my daily existence. I was building something new, something authentic from the painful truth rather than comfortable lies. 1 year after the birthday that changed everything, I found myself in a place I never could have imagined. Not just financially secure, but emotionally stronger, with clearer boundaries and deeper, more authentic relationships than I had before the betrayal. The healing journey had not been linear. There were still days when anger would surge unexpectedly, when the memory of those years of unnecessary struggle would feel fresh and raw. But those moments came less frequently now, subsumed by the full life I was building. My parents and I established a cautious reconciliation process. We met monthly for lunch, with clear boundaries and expectations. They showed genuine remorse, continued therapy, and made small but consistent restitution payments that Walter's team structured as part of their amends process. I never thought I would sit at a table with them again without feeling rage. I admitted to my therapist during one of our now bi-weekly sessions. It isn't forgetting or even complete forgiveness yet, but it is something like peace. The financial education Walter provided transformed my relationship with money. I now managed my investments with confidence, understanding the balance between security and growth. The remaining funds, though far smaller than they should have been, were carefully managed to provide long-term stability while allowing me to live comfortably in the present. Walter experienced another health scare, more serious than the first, that required a brief hospitalization. The fragility of his mortality brought perspective to our family situation. Despite the betrayal, despite the legal consequences, he was still my grandfather and my parents' father. The time we had together was limited and precious, even with the shadow of past actions. During his recovery, I spent hours at his bedside, learning more about his early years, his relationship with my grandmother, his regrets and triumphs. These conversations deepened my understanding not just of him, but of the complex family dynamics that had contributed, though never excused, my parents' actions. My design career flourished, with my side business growing to the point where I was considering whether to pursue it full-time. I hired 2 junior designers to help with the increasing client load and a business manager to handle the administrative aspects I had little interest in. The mentorship program expanded as well, with 5 young designers now receiving scholarships and professional guidance. Watching them grow in confidence and skill brought a satisfaction unlike anything I had experienced professionally before. Thomas and I grew steadily closer, our relationship built on a foundation of transparency that I now recognized had been missing from most of my previous relationships, familial and romantic alike. He had his own apartment but spent most nights at mine, our lives intertwining in a way that felt natural and unforced. "You know what amazes me most about you?" he said one evening as we cooked dinner together in my kitchen. "How you've taken something that could have made you bitter and turned it into growth instead." The apartment had truly become my home, filled with art and books that reflected my taste, decorated in colors that brought me joy. It was modest compared to what might have been mine had the trust remained intact, but it was fully mine in a way the Gold Coast property never would have been. My cousin Natalie and I developed a genuine friendship that surprised us both. The artificial competition that had characterized our earlier relationship gave way to mutual support and understanding. She even joined the board of the mentorship program, contributing both funds and connections. On the anniversary of the revelation, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment. Walter was there, looking frailer than I like to admit, but still sharp as ever. Natalie and Thomas, Jennifer, and a few close friends from work. Notably absent were my parents, not because they weren't invited, but because they recognized that this particular milestone was not one they should be part of. As we shared a meal around my dining table, I looked at these people who had become my chosen family and felt a surge of gratitude that nearly overwhelmed me. "A year ago, I thought my life was destroyed," I said, raising my glass in toast. "What I've learned since then is that when the foundation is revealed to be false, you have the opportunity to build something true in its place." Walter nodded approval, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "To truth," he said simply, raising his glass to meet mine. "To truth," the others echoed. Later, after the guests had gone and only Thomas remained, helping me load the dishwasher in comfortable silence, I reflected on the deeper lessons of the past year. I had learned that financial wealth, while providing security and opportunity, was not the most valuable currency. Trust, authenticity, and self-knowledge were far more precious and much harder to rebuild once broken. I had learned that forgiveness was not a single act but a process, one that did not require forgetting or excusing but did, eventually, lead to a lightening of the burden of anger. Most importantly, I had learned that while we cannot choose what happens to us, we have absolute sovereignty over how we respond, over what we build from both gifts and wreckage. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you for witnessing my journey. If you're like this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to unexpected growth? Share your experiences in the comments below.